All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown. All three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing Midnight and Blue by Ian Rankin. This is book number 25 in his Inspector Rebus Mystery series that's set up in Scotland, Edinburgh. I've got all of the Inspector Rebus novels over here. We'll pan through the library, and they're right there. That's all of them right there. So I've been collecting the Inspector Rebus novels for probably 25, 30 years now. Loving each one of them. Anyway, book number 25. Let's talk about the cover first, because you know I love graphic design and cover illustration. I think this one's a little weak. I mean, we've got the name and everything in a pretty bland font, and then a little silhouette of a guy with, I'm thinking it's lights. Yeah, it's just street lights and street lamps and stuff. I mean, let's talk about Rebus, of course. Inspector Rebus, he's a detective in Edinburgh. For the first 24 books of this series, we've seen him solve murders. We kind of get it. He's got all the foibles of most detectives. I think he was an alcoholic at one point. He's gotten involved with co-workers at other points. He's pissed off the upper brass, his chain of command. He's pissed them off in various books. All those things. Well respected by some officers in the police, not respected by other officers in the police. Pretty typical for your Inspector murder mystery series type thing. Police procedurals. Set in Scotland. Okay, so now this book I wasn't expecting it to be a prison novel. It's a prison novel. It's set, about half of the book is set inside of a prison because our Inspector Rebus is tossed into prison for a murder. He's in protective custody for the first 6 or so months of his stay in prison. Now, whenever I watch a television show about prisons, whenever I read a book that has prisons or prison guards, I always pay close attention because, if you followed my channel for any length of time, you know I've worked in a prison for a long time, so I know a lot about prisons. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that this opened up in a prison. I'm like, oh, we're going to get a prison novel. And our inspector is in prison, and he's in protective custody, which happens in prisons. That's pretty typical. If a policeman goes into prison, or if an ex-prison guard ends up in prison, they have to put him in protective custody because there's a big target on his back. They do that in American prisons, at least the ones I worked at. Apparently they do that in Scotland too. So I'm expecting, as I'm reading this, I'm going to find a lot of, because in every television show I watch about prisons, I find things wrong. Like, they can never get it right. They never get prisons right. Orange is the New Black is the furthest thing from a reality of a prison show. I mean, everything in that show is just 100% bull horse shit. Just to put it mildly. There's a few things that are slightly accurate, whatever. But, anyway, most of it's, I was thinking I'm going to find a lot of nonsense in this. Much to my disappointment, there was not a lot of nonsense in this. Apparently the Scottish prisons are run pretty much like the American prisons in every facet of prison stuff. Their security measures are the same. The way the inmates interact with each other is the same. The prison hierarchy of tough guys and everything's is the same. I mean, it's all kind of like, he describes this prison in Scotland much like the prison I work at in Utah, and it's and he didn't get a lot wrong. It was pretty damned accurate. There were a few little differences between the Scottish prison and an American prison, but they weren't that big of differences. Anyway, our inspector's in prison for a murder. Okay, so that's kind of the thing. After 6 months of being in isolation, they actually move him to Gen Pop. Now, general population is he's getting moved to be with he's no longer in in an isolated area where he can be safe. Now he's in where all the other inmates have access to him, and all the other inmates know that he's an ex-cop. Some of the inmates were people that he busted and put in prison himself. But things are going to kind of work out okay for Rebus in this situation, because he does have some of the heavies in the prison kind of looking out for him. What happens pretty early on, though, is once he gets moved to Gen Pop, there's a murder that takes place in the prison in the same cell block where Rebus is housed. And so what happens after that is this murder gets investigated by an outside agency. The prison never investigates itself. They always call in a outside police agency to come in and investigate any real serious crimes that happen in the prison, because you want to get rid of the bias, right? So the outside police come into the prison to investigate this murder that's happened on the cell block, and lo and behold, the investigating officer just happens to be Inspector Rebus's old partner, Siobhan Clark, who through all of the Rebus books, all the previous 24 Rebus books, she's been his partner, his friend, his confidant, and now she's in the prison investigating this murder. And so they're kind of having some interactions in prison. There's another character named Malcolm Fox who is also in this. He is another one of the main characters in the Rebus thing. He is part of the complaints department. In other words, in Scotland, it's called the Complaints Department. In America, it would be called the Internal Affairs Department, like the police who investigate the police for wrongdoing. In fact, one of my favorite books in the Inspector Rebus universe of books is actually called The Complaints, and it focuses mostly on Malcolm Fox and his job as an internal affairs investigator. Probably my favorite Inspector Rebus novel was that one. And it didn't really even have Inspector Rebus in it, per se. Anyway, let's get back to the murder that took place in the prison. So this thing's being investigated. Inspector Rebus himself is an inmate. And it devolves into sort of a cat and mouse game between the inmates, the prison guards. There's good prison guards. There's corrupt prison guards. There's good inmates. There's corrupt inmates. There's good police investigating this. There's bad police investigating this. All of this kind of like stews together into a nice little stew pot. And at one point, the Bay City Rollers are mentioned. Bay City Rollers are from Scotland, Edinburgh. I'm wearing my Bay City Rollers shirt right now in honor of the fact that Ian Rankin mentioned the Bay City Rollers in the book. Not that they had any part in the murder. They didn't. They did not. The Bay City Rollers were a very friendly, kid-friendly boy band in the 70s. They did not murder anybody in the Inspector Rebus murder mysteries. But they get mentioned, and I was like, hey, they mentioned the Bay City Rollers. Anyway, I kind of explained the plot. It's pretty cool. So it was an unexpected turn for the Inspector Rebus series, I will say that. Did I enjoy it, though? I thought once it was set in the prison, I was like, I'm going to really enjoy this. But I was just kind of like, it's like an average Inspector Rebus. I mean, I would give it, some of the Inspector Rebus books are like 10 out of 10s. I would give this like a 7.5 out of 10 for book number 25.